Give it about another minute. I see Brooklyn, Maryland, Long Island. Okay. 30 more seconds. We still have some folks coming in from the waiting room. Staten Island and Brooklyn, so a lot of New York City today. All right. We'll begin. And as folks come in, we will welcome them. We have one more before we start. Okay. Once again, welcome all. Thank you so much for joining us today. Our virtual roundtables have become a staple for classroom culture over the last month. First, it was inspired by COVID-19's impact on education, and more recently, it's been impacted by the activism across the country. My name is Meredith, and I am the co-founder of Classroom Culture, and we are based in Washington, D.C. Classroom Culture was founded 5 years ago as a platform to bring educators together to collaborate and lead. I've been a special educator for the last 10 years, teaching English on the middle school level, and consider that to be my give back to a population that's often underserved and ignored. The recent events of the last week across the country have inspired us all to find ways to bring more awareness and show support. There are so many layers to America's shameful history and relationship with bigotry that at many times we are overwhelmed where to begin. However, there are endless ways to participate in the war to protect Black bodies and affect change. Having conversations and sharing knowledge with the people around you is activism. This afternoon's discussion is a space for us to discuss the evolution of the talk. In this day and age, we see two talks. The talks that Black parents have with Black children, and the talk that all parents and educators need to have about racism as an American construct. The talk can feel like a rites of passage that the Black family has with all of its children. The talk is full of worry, is blunt, is hopeful, is difficult, and is sadly required. The talk spans how to address police officers, when not to raise your voice, how to keep your hands present when shopping. The list goes on. My mother gave me the talk at the age of 7, and I remember it vividly. The talk also exists in our schools with programming, diversity and equity offices, the need for more diverse texts, and the need for more Black teachers. Classroom Culture is excited to have this conversation with all of you to share ideas, stories, and resources with the hopes that you return to your communities and your families with a renewed spirit of knowing that you are not alone and that there are targeted next steps. We welcome you. As we transition to begin, please be sure to mute yourselves during the discussion. If you would like to speak, please unmute and jump in. Our facilitator, Nelly, will be sure to include you. You can also send questions in the chat room and even chat there with other attendees. We'll be sure to leave time at the end for Q&A. During the discussion, we will also be sharing resources with all of you, and we'll share a PDF on our social media within the next 48 hours. Let's begin with brief intros of our roundtable participants. Our facilitator today is Nelly. Nelly, wherever you are, just wave. Thanks. And Nelly is a special education teacher for over 10 years and currently the SPED chair at her high school in Manhattan and the parent of a young daughter. Joshua, where are you, Joshua? Joshua has experience as a special educator in the Bronx and is currently a high school assistant principal in Manhattan. Marsha is a special education teacher who has worked for the New York City Department of Education for the last 14 years in Brooklyn, New York. Tyaisha is a special education teacher on the middle school level, teaching global history. She is also based in Brooklyn. Tyshawn has been an educator for 11 years, and he's currently a CTE teacher of business and technology at his school in Manhattan, and a parent of a college-aged son and 2 younger sons. Vaughn, where are you, Vaughn? Vaughn's here joining us as a marketing and business development consultant who brings with him a world of knowledge and experience on navigating spaces as a Black man. Yamiley is in a special place today. We were chatting with her earlier. She's all the way in Iowa, and she's an educator with more than 15 years experience, spanning grades 1 through 8, and is also the mother of 3 sons. The Dept is a middle school ELA teacher in Queens, New York, and is also the mother of a son. To open the discussion, we have a clip to share with you, which oddly enough came across my Facebook feed this morning, of a young teenager sharing the 16 tips his mother gave him on how to navigate the world as a Black boy. I will share my screen with you, and then from there, I will hand it over to Nelly, who will begin with the first question. One second, I'll just want to get it perfect for you all.
Don't put your hands in your pockets. Don't put your hoodie on. Don't be outside with no shirt on. Check in with your people. It don't matter even if you down the street. Don't be out too late. Don't touch anything you're not buying. Never leave the store without a receipt or a bag, even if it's just a pack of gum. Never make it look like there's an altercation between you and someone else. Never leave the house without your ID. Don't drive with a wife beat on. Don't drive with a do-rag on. Don't go out in public with neither. Don't ride with the music too loud. Don't stare at a Caucasian woman. If a cop stop you randomly and start questioning you, don't talk back. Just compromise. If you ever get pulled over, hands on the dashboard, and ask, could you get out your license and registration?
So with a heavy heart.
You know why Rosa Parks is who you learn about? Fun fact.
Nelly, do you feel ready to pick it up from here? Sorry, Nelly, gonna unmute you. Nelly, you're muted. You got it? Technology. Okay, there you go.
Okay, much better. If you guys hear background noise, I'm so sorry. My little one. Anyway, so we're gonna begin with the guys, fellas. I want to start with you. The video clips rings true to many Black men. Can you remember when you had to talk with your parents, and how did you process it all?
I vividly remember the talk. I was raised by a village of women. My mom, my grandmother, my great-grandmother all pretty much sat me down and talked about how to conduct myself in different situations. And that discussion was definitely younger than 10 years old. So by the time I was in middle school, I was definitely conducting myself in a way where I had to be aware of my surroundings at all times. I remember in elementary school, you used to be able to walk or take the bus to school. So you had to be prepared when you're out in the streets to engage with different people.
I remember my talk, I think I was 10, and actually it was an experience where me and my father were pulled over by the police, and actually we left my grandmother's funeral, and the cop claimed that my dad ran a stop sign that was not really there at all. And so the discussion was around, why did you pull me over? And the stop sign is not there. There's no stop sign in the vicinity. And my father didn't really argue with him, but he was just like, okay, I'm just leaving my mother's funeral. I'm not going to argue with you. But the police officer just kind of shrugged it off and said, yeah, just pay attention next time. And when he left, he turned around and told me that this is what you kind of have to do when you engage with police. You have to kind of compromise and comply to what they're saying, even though it's not in the direction of what you actually might have done in the situation. And that kind of started a trend of conversations we had over the years with different scenarios happening in my life and in his life. But I know that was the start when I was 10. And it kind of progressed even when I got to high school.
So can everybody hear me? So I think, to piggyback off of Tyshawn, I was raised by a village of women as well. And I want to say, as a matter of fact, my mom told me this morning when I was telling her I was doing this panel that we had that discussion. I might have been 7 or 8. Living in Crown Heights, Brooklyn in the 80s was a different world. But even in that world, you still had to navigate the fact that the cops were the bigger threat than the neighborhood itself. And she was very much like, listen, if you are wherever, understand that you are at risk, so move accordingly. I think I remember I might have been in 4th grade and I went around a corner to a store I wasn't supposed to go to. And one of my teachers saw me and called the house. And I probably spent about a good 2 hours running around the house trying to not get beat because I basically broke the rules of don't go certain places that'll put you at risk of being, be stopped by the cops or whatever have you. I mean, it was early for me.
Vivette, you had your hand up?
No, I was just identifying with what Vaughn was saying in terms of having to have that own talk with my son over and over again, being scared every time he leaves. I remember specifically having it with him when he got his driver's license. And in every, high point of his life, there was always this almost, quenching it a little bit. Like he's excited. Oh, I got my license. Mom, let me have the whip. I'm about to go out. And it's like, yeah, but be careful, and all this trepidation and fear. And he lives on his own. And at every stage of his life, it's always been, but be careful how he interacts with police, how he has to carry himself. And it's a lot of pressure. And that's from the perspective of the mother. And hearing these men talk about their experiences, it hurts.
I remember my aunts had to have this conversation with my cousins who's a little younger than me, and he started driving very, very early. So driving around, and the cops stopped him in front of the building. And we stood outside, and the cops were like, go inside. You guys don't have to come out here. And my aunt was like, no, that's mine. That over there, that belongs to me. So I'm going to wait till you're done so that you can talk, so I can talk to him afterwards. And then after the cops let him go, it wasn't even a warning. I don't know what he did. They were saying, my aunt said, you have to be very careful. Understand, things are not as easy as you think they are. Please make sure when you drive, you tell the cops, listen, if they need your license and registration, I'm going to go reach for my license and registration. Can I get it? Or if they want to do it, have them do it. And if they pull you out the car, yes sir, no sir, yes ma'am, no ma'am. Don't be hostile, no attitude, proper English, pull up your pants, keep your hands to your sides, don't make any false moves. And it was just like an array, like it's like a bullet point after bullet point. And I'm sitting here, I'm like, I had it was just a lot to process for a younger man who has to go out and navigate this world. It was a lot to do and a lot for him to think about. So I think about that all the time, and it's unfair. Anyone else? Anybody else can jump in. You guys can jump in if you need to talk. That's fine.
Hey, good afternoon. My name's Kevin. I'm a guy. I would say my dad had to talk with me, similar to the story the gentleman told. We were pulled over by a cop. So I must have been like 5 or something, on Empire Boulevard, right by Ebbetsfield. Like, I vividly remember where we were. I grew up in Crown Heights as well. And as we got pulled over, my dad was literally telling me everything he needed to do. And to be very honest, everything he said to me that day, I've practiced up until this point in terms of like how to manage a police officer when they pull me over, to make sure that they're not agitated. You know, fast forward from being 5 to when I was about 20 or so, I got pulled over in college. I went to college in Massachusetts. It was a car full of Black men, all about 6'2", in a Nissan Sentra, so we barely fit in there. And the police officer pulled us over and pulled out a service weapon. And I'm not a police officer, but I knew that he wasn't supposed to do that, and I knew he was terrified. And literally, I was telling them in the car, and I'm not kidding, exactly what my dad was telling me when I was 5. And I was like, "Keep your hands on the wheel." It was crazy. We ended up we were going 20 miles over the speed limit. They shut down the route that we were on. We were there for about 2 hours. They wanted to search the car for all sorts of madness. Either way, you know, fast forward to now, I have a daughter who's 20 in college. I have a son who's 13, and a daughter who's 10. And to be very honest with you, I've consciously gone to like my local precinct meetings specifically because I feel that police don't hit people they know. So I make sure they know who I am, and I bring my son there so that I just told him this. I mean, this is before all this happened. I said, if you get pulled over by a cop in this neighborhood, say a cop's name. You're like, "Yo, Detective Martinos," like, call him. And I was like, you can say you need to call your dad. They're gonna not listen to that. Say the name of one of these cops, and they know him. So I'm like, you need to make sure you have a name or some password or some safe word, which is some cop's name, and it'll probably make them stop doing what they're doing to you. So, you know, I think that these stories are messed up because I don't think I called it trauma until I learned the word trauma a couple of years ago. But I've actually passed that on to my son with these stories of how to protect his body, and my daughter too. I had the same conversation with her. But you know, I do think it's an opportunity, you know, in the world we live in now, to change the narrative, like by allowing oppressors to change the way they're acting. But I think there's also an active component to just, in the meantime, like we have to pretend that the word police is a verb, and just police ourselves and police our own communities, and stop, like, let them be law enforcement, or better yet, hold them to that responsibility. So I just wanted to share that. Thanks. Oh, didn't mean to do that.
Hi, my name is Chanel. I wanted to share with you guys. So I have a 10-year-old son and a 3, almost 4-year-old son. And my first time explaining to my son that he was different from the rest of the kids because of the color of his skin was when he was in, I would say, as early as kindergarten. He attends PS 11 in Brooklyn, which is a very culturally diverse school. And I had to explain to him that he couldn't have a mohawk like Zach because his hair texture was different, which was the starting point of me talking about differences in people. And as he got older in that school, I had to always make sure that I constantly tell him, you know, you're great, you're better than, you're you know, boosting his motivation and let him know, like, don't ever let nobody put you down or think they're better than you because of the color of your skin. And I've been doing this consistently every year since he was in kindergarten. And when it got really real for me is when Eric Gardner passed away due to police brutality. And he actually was old enough to see on the news and understand what was happening. And he became so fearful of, you know, the police. Up until then, it was like, oh, you know, when I grow up, I want to be a police officer. I want to help my neighborhood. Police are good. But in his eyes, it was just like, they're there to kill us. And it was very hard for me to explain to him that not all police officers are bad. And I had to have like a friend of mine that comes over frequently. My voice is shaking because it always gets me upset. He had to come over in his uniform so I could say, Cameron, you know, this is CJ. You see him all the time. He plays basketball with you. You know, he's, you know, playing video games with you, but he's also a police officer. So you know that he's a good person. He just have on a uniform. And I believe, I mean, when that happened, it kind of, you know, settled it for him a while. He wasn't so fearful and wouldn't get scared. But then last Halloween, across the street from his school, again, he goes to PS 11, one of the neighbors decided that it was cool for them to put pictures of children, brown children hanging by nooses in their window. And this is across the street from my elementary school, you know, pre-K to 5th grade. So I'm trying to explain to my 5th grader at this point, you know, trying to explain to them that that person just does not understand. And again, the color of your skin conversation pretty much comes up. You know, don't think because the color of your skin that you are less than, that you can't be this person. You know, there's always going to be people in the world who treat you different because of that. And it kind of breaks my heart that at an early age that you have to start instilling this into your children. And even now with my 3-year-old, it's like, okay, what do I say to him? When is going to be, you know, the right time to tell him? Do I use my 10-year-old to kind of help him with that? Do I help, you know, or do I just wait until he kind of faces it himself? And now with you know, the whole George Floyd thing, it brings up, well, what happened? I thought all police officers wasn't bad. So it kind of gives like mixed emotions. And I find myself now starting with him. We watch Roots. I started with Roots, Rosewood. You know, I went through the whole civil war and Confederate flag thing, because it's like, okay, now I can no longer pretty much try to cover up what I really don't want you to see the world as. But the reality is, this is what it is. You know, I don't want you to grow up thinking that we live in this fantasy place and everything is all hunky-dory when it's really not, you know? And it's really, 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 really hard. And it breaks my heart. It really does breaks my heart, because never, you know, it's one of the hardest things I had to do so far as a parent. One of the hardest. That's all I have.
Chanel, thank you for sharing. I really appreciate that. That was tough. That was tough. So this leads me to ask, like, ladies, is it the same thing for girls when girls have to share, when we got to tell our girls things? Is it the same thing? Is it the same way?
Good evening, everyone. I want to say that
Tyaisha, you're muted.
Oh, hi guys. So I want to say that I could relate to a lot of the comments. I was raised by my grandmother and grandfather. Both of their roots are from the South, but of course, you know, they came up north and started a life. But I remember the talk from like 6 or 7 and just being terrified. Like, it's like my grandmother was like, Tyaisha, you know, you see the police, don't do anything to make them kill you. Like, I can remember that vividly. Like, don't do anything to make them kill you. You say yes, sir. You say you no, sir. And she was saying, even in my days, we couldn't look them in the eyes. So I'm a law-abiding citizen. I pretty much follow the rules, and my whole life, I had a fear of the police. And I know I have friends and family who are, you know, who are police officers that I love and respect. And I know that they're good people, but it doesn't take away from what was instilled in me from a little girl. So I had that talk. I was about 7 or 8 when my grandmother had to talk with me about how to act in the streets and when police officers approach you. So I could definitely relate.
I didn't have the talk growing up. My talk looked different. It was more so, don't do things that could embarrass because then people will have the impression that all of us do that or behave that way. So you don't want to feed into the stereotype. But we did have conversations about you can't go everywhere. You can't hang out with everybody's child. You need to be in this house. Like I was in high school and I couldn't hang out with my friends. First generation West Indian. And it was like, no, you can't be like everybody else because we don't want you to get caught up in whatever could possibly happen, even if it's not necessarily what the police officers think it is. Which for me, I didn't realize that we were a threat as Black women until Sandra Bland. I knew Black men, but I never heard of a Black woman being murdered by a police officer until she passed away. So that for me shifted my thinking. I know as a classroom teacher, I have conversations with my students, even when I taught in kindergarten, to say, hey, don't do certain things. Yeah, you may be able to do it at home. And I'm not saying that what you do at home or in your neighborhood is wrong, because it's not. But you have to be able to code switch. And that's my job as your teacher, to teach you how to code switch. Because I don't want people to mistake what you do and then escalate it to something that it never was.
Thank you, Marsha, which is actually where I want to segue to. So I want to ask about school and race and racism. Should race and racism be part of the school curriculum? Should we have that part of the school curriculum?
Oh, absolutely. I think we should have that part of the curriculum. Hi, everybody. Yamiley over here from the Midwest. My career has taken me, and I've been the director of schools previously. And while we look for curriculum to teach our kids, being part of a group that adopts curriculum, I've always tried to find something that our students can relate to. And it's very difficult. Most of the publishers put almost all of the same thing, like Pearson is in charge of everything. Pearson puts everything out. There's no diversity in the publishers. There's no diversity in the books. And a lot of times the curriculum is false. It's teaching our students things that are not even correct in history. For example, I have a son who's in middle school. He was learning about slavery and times. And I read with him that slaves could choose to no longer be slaves as long as they converted to Christianity. And he told me that, and I said, that is not true. You must have it wrong. And he brought me the book and showed it to me. So, I contacted the school, and as an educator, I said, hey, I'm going to work with you. I'm not even going to charge you, because most of the time I charge other people. I'm going to do this for you for free because this is wrong. They did not even know. And, they said, well, we've been using the same curriculum and the same textbook for years. So imagine how many classrooms of students who were taught this wrong information. So even the teachers themselves, no one stopped to say, this is not true, kids, or don't read this chapter because this is not relevant. The teachers themselves are not comfortable to even have enough knowledge to teach reality and truth to our children. So our children don't know about themselves, hence they don't have pride of themselves, which is a whole another segue I'm not even going to go into. But the teachers who are teaching them don't know how to teach them and don't know what to teach them. So yes, there should be race, there should be ethnicity taught in the schools. My daughter, who is a third grader, last year as a second grader, got into an argument with her teacher and came home after school and cried to me because they said all Black people came from Africa. She told her teacher, because we're from Haiti, and she said, no, my family is Haitian, so we're not African American, we're Haitian American. And the teacher said, no, everybody's Black, everybody's African American. And she was very angry and said, not all Black people come from Africa. And her teacher did not understand that concept. second grade. So if a second grader could teach her teacher the idea of ethnicity versus race, we have a problem in our school system. So there is just many examples I can go on and on and on to give you as to why we need to teach, first of all, our teachers. We need to teach them better because they are not standing on a strong platform to teach our upcoming youth about themselves.
I wouldn't trust some of these teachers to teach my child anything about race or ethnicity. They need to go back to school. They need training. They are ill-equipped to handle these questions, and it is our children who are often acting as the teachers in those spaces. That is not a safe environment in which to place our children. I remember my own experience. I'm 45 years old. In the second grade, I grew up on Long Island. I'm first generation Jamaican. And every year we go back and forth to Jamaica. So even as in second grade, you're like 7, 8 years old, but I knew Jamaica very well, okay, my parents' intentional doing. And so we had a geography. Oh, I remember this so vividly. I'm getting tight just thinking about it because she was so out of pocket, this teacher, Miss Crucial. So we had a geography lesson. And, you know, you say A, Alabama, B, Baltimore, but it could be anywhere around the world, right? So we got to O, it was my turn. I said, Ocho Rios. The lady told me there's no such place. I said, no, miss, there is. I was just there. She said, oh, you don't need to lie in class. The woman called me out, called me a liar, went off. Oh, but she did the wrong thing messing with Phyllis's daughter. That was a dub for her. Oh, it was wrong. And I called my mother. I went home and I told her, and we had to educate this woman. My mother had to come up to the class. We bought her a map. We bought her artifacts from Jamaica. It's like, but we went in on her, okay? By the time, that summer when I came back to third grade, she went to Jamaica that summer. And she took a picture. She said, I went to Ocho Rios, but look at all of that. And the embarrassment and ridicule. And what if I wasn't the type of child who was taught from home to stand up for myself? What could that have turned into? So watch these teachers. That's all I'm going to say. Watch them. Don't let them teach your child stuff because they'll know what they're doing.
Trust me.
There's a great book, Culturally Responsive Teaching, that I brought to my previous school. I made them do a book study on it, and the surprise in the teachers' faces and how their eyes bug out when you explain how a child can not looking at you when you're talking to them as disrespect, something that small that we all know. They said, well, I told him to look at me because I'm talking to him. But at my house, my child better not look at me when I'm talking to him. He better look at the floor in shame. So that the difference between that and now you're mad at him and taking things personally and punishing him for that. And now I have to come from district office to have a conversation between parent and teacher. And now the student is feeling like you don't like him and thus he's not going to learn from you because children don't learn from people they don't like. So Culturally Responsive Teaching is a great book that I'm just going to put out there. If anyone wants to pick it up, it's a quick read. But I think it's worth its weight in gold.
I just have a question. I'm not a teacher or anything, but I would like to know at what point. I remember when I was in middle school, junior high school, we learned about so many like Black Americans, like
Chanel, you're frozen.
Across Martin Luther King. We, did the Turners and the Motley. So I just want to know, like, at what point did schools stop teaching this?
Which one of us is going to take that one?
I can't even. Stopped. Did we stop? I mean, I remember as a kid learning about a lot of these things, a lot of these people. But I don't know, it's like, did we stop teaching these things, Tyshawn?
I think it's of the teacher. I don't think we stop teaching. I think it's the teacher who makes the decisions on what we want to teach our children. And that's the biggest thing right there. This is what I have to deal with teachers all the time. The preference of what you decide to put in the classroom is what's going to shape the pathway of what these kids are going to experience. We didn't stop teaching it. We're living it right now, even from the past to now. But the sad part is when you ask the teacher to be culturally responsive in their instruction, they look at you with dead eyes and say, what are you talking about? And you can give them as many books and articles as possible, but you all know I live this every day. I watch and see people in my office tell me that they're being culturally responsive, and I ask for the evidence and they don't have it. And so this is where I say, you know, to us as colleagues, we have to push the button when it comes to that, the best instruction we want for our kids. You have to have those difficult conversations and ask people to prove what they're showing. Because if they don't, then it's going to have this continuous circle of, yeah, I'm doing it, but you're not doing it. Because if a kid can't speak to it, that's not your evidence. That's just them to follow in line what you want them to do.
But Josh, I also think it goes to the level of them being uncomfortable, and I'm okay with them being uncomfortable. They won't teach what they didn't learn, and they won't, because they never learned it, because their teachers weren't comfortable teaching it and didn't find it important, because the only history they wanted to learn was theirs. And my thing is, you should always be uncomfortable teaching, because you should be expecting other people to chime in and say, hey, that's not right. And you use those as teachable moments. But they aren't willing to educate themselves enough to teach about different cultures, different classes, different races, because they're not comfortable having those conversations. And the minute a student says, Miss, I might not agree with that, it becomes a referral to the office, a discipline problem, and then it turns into, I think this kid needs an IEP because they can't stay in class and can't focus. So it all goes to them not being comfortable enough with who they are. And so God forbid they teach our kids to be proud of who they are. And let's just be honest. The majority of the teachers who are not Black who teach in the Department of Education live on Long Island and only teach in the DOE because they make more money and they can't get jobs on Long Island. So until we teach them that our kids matter, they're not going to make our kids matter. And that's not all schools, but it's schools where you have weak leaders. And you have a principal who was a failed teacher, who was a failed AP, who was a failed everything, but they're promoted because of the way they look and the connections they've made.
And who they know.
Well, the connections they've made. And it's not a pretty picture. And you know me, I have zero filters and I call them out. But I can also stand on the fact that I'm qualified and they can never challenge me. If it was a Black teacher doing that same thing, the parents would come in a minute and say, what are your qualifications for this class? And, you know, where'd you get your degree and where'd you do your student teaching? I'm sorry, but Adelphi and Hofstra are not the cultural epicenters of the world. And that's where a lot of these teachers come from. I could say more, but I'm going to stop and mute myself.
So to piggyback on that, I have a question. I mean, from what I'm hearing, a lot of that is very much, you know, twice the work, half the respect, right? So for the administrators and for the teachers as well, how much of the cultural sensitivity that you see from your coworkers, let's say, you know, whether it's a mandate that's handed down or some guidelines, how much of that is actually performative versus substantive? You know what I mean? Like how much of it is very much like, well, we had to do this because it's Black History Month versus actually doing like quality materials in the classroom that are going to enrich those kids?
I think that goes to what we were saying earlier. Teachers have an abundance of choice. The administrator gives you the guidelines, you implement it. Teachers have an abundance of choice. It's the uncomfortability that they have in taking the risk of teaching our children. That's what it comes down to.
They're afraid of our children.
That too.
You sit there and you tell me, oh, well, we have high standards and we need to offer AP classes, et cetera, but our students are failing. And you say, oh, that's okay. You know what? Maybe you can have the conversation with Susie Q about her promotion, but it's your job. Why do I have to have the conversation because I'm Black? You tiptoe around the conversations, and when I try to give you feedback to help you navigate the waters, you're not really listening. You're doing it as something to check off on your checklist, because we've had the culturally responsive book. We've even had black facilitators walk us through certain workshops, and I sit there wondering, how much of it did my coworkers learn?
I laugh because Vaughn asked the question about summative versus formative. I have 10 fingers, and I would say that 4 teachers might know the difference between formative and summative education. I mean, formative and summative assessment. You have teachers who grade every single thing. Oh, I'm gonna grade. Well, sweetheart, you don't grade the learning process, okay? You don't grade them as they're learning it. You don't grade the learning process. But you have principals who say, oh, okay, that's fine, because they don't know. And I laugh at this whole, the only uncomfortable conversation is the one that people refuse to have. It's uncomfortable because you refuse to have it when you should have it, and then you let it go on, and it becomes crazy. I can't say what I want to say. I'm just going to be, I really want to say it, but I don't. I will say this. Marsha just said something that was like touching to me, because she said, you even had a Black person come in and the white colleagues didn't get it. I always say, I'm a Black man, not a man who happens to be Black. And I think sometimes we forget that there is a difference in our own culture. There are people who happen to be Black. And they push who they are aside so they can try to move forward. It's, oh, well, you know, we're all great. No, we're not great. I'm a Black man, and I live that every day. I laugh because I didn't say anything earlier when we were talking about when we had our first talk. Nothing prepared me with my first talk to what happened to me a year and a half ago. I'm leaving my house, 4:30 in the morning, going to the gym. That's what I do. I walk outside, person runs by, I'm like, whatever. I stop, but I took stock of it. I get to the corner, 3 police cars, 6 cops pull up, guns drawn on me because I fit the profile at 4:30 in the morning. Hands up, ID's in my pocket, boom, boom, boom. The person you're looking for ran that way. Gave them a total description, everything else. Officer told me, oh, you're too intelligent and well-spoken to be a criminal. I went to the police station and filed a report. Nothing happened. So it's nothing in life will ever prepare you for what these people do and how these gangs with guns, these legal gangs with guns operate. So it's just no amount of education, no amount of preparing, and no amount of talking will ever prepare you for it. And they're looking for a reason. But I will say, we have some great teachers and some great schools who are doing the work. They are doing the work, and the kids are responding, and the kids are getting it. But we have too many people who are not doing the work. And the number of people not doing the work outweigh the people doing the work, and they're actually causing damage.
Which is a great segue, Michael. You know what? Because recently, I don't know if you guys saw, it was Brian Stevenson who's a social lawyer, and he did Just Mercy. He said if it was supposed to happen now, we would not win Brown versus Board of Education. Do you guys agree, or you guys disagree?
I saw that, and I really had to think carefully. And after seeing how much Trump is accepted and loved, I'm going to say I agree. Because as someone who immigrated to the United States, my first experience of racism was in the United States, was not in Haiti. And it shocked me, because in Haiti, there's all types of people, Europeans, from, white, everybody, it comes to Haiti for different types of things. And so when I saw how white people hated Black people and felt comfortable to now tell you to your face because their president said, he's down with this and he's down with that. So he makes his views seem normal. So that's what I have with it. He normalizes racism. He normalizes bigotry. He normalizes all the oppressive patriarchy ideas that he has. And so now people who knew or felt like they had to stifle themselves no longer feel like they have to stifle themselves. And it's because of that freedom that they now feel that they can blatantly kill us, even though everyone's out here with their phones recording as you're killing the man, or out here doing whatever it is that you shouldn't be doing, but because you feel like the president of the United States is behind you, or everybody else who's supporting him is behind you and supports you, you're brazen. You feel all powerful, all omnipotent. And thus, there's no change. We're not at the cusp of change right now. We're not at the cusp of togetherness and blending the school districts. We're not there. Now we're saying that, you know what, we should be separated. We are better than you guys. Go back to where you came from. I mean, there's countless, I don't need to start giving the examples. There's countless of Karens and Chads out there feeling that it's okay to tell us how they feel about us. And raising kids in the United States, I want to take them back to Haiti. We don't have that. We don't have that. And I don't think Board of Brown would have passed today with this man in office.
I'm going to see if we can ask one more question. And I don't know if it's in your schools, but it definitely is in New York City schools. Should policing be a part of education? Should we have policing in our schools as a part of our education? Like, should we have officers in our environments when we're in school? Is this something we should do? Go ahead, Vaughn.
So I read an article, I want to say last week, passed along through NPR, where it talks about policing is violence work. So the presence of police implies that someone needs to be controlled, or there is some situation that is outside the purview of the professionals that are in that space, to put it bluntly, right? So at the end of the day, whether you use whatever these folks are using, call them animals, savages, thugs, whatever it is, the idea of police in the schools, right? I grew up in Brooklyn, K through high school, right? So I remember when metal detectors came along. I remember when all these incidents happened. And the idea was that you needed these things to stop these kids who were hyper violent or whatever you want to call it. So I think it perpetuates that same stereotype. We're not talking like, we're not seeing, specifically to New York City, we're not seeing mass shootings in the same way. I could understand if you've got a spat of mass shootings where you require someone in, $3,000 worth of riot gear plus whatever have you. But you're talking about, like, at the end of the day, these kids are in this environment, which we know that poverty leads to crime, blah, 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 blah. All the statistical data is there. So you're just perpetuating something that, if you really want to change it, you remove that and start curing the thing that is causing it in the first place.
Yeah, I agree.
When I saw this question, I was very excited to partake in it. I'm from the Midwest, as you guys know, and like you said, no, we're not as high crime as a big city, but we do have police in our schools. And what I realized that this causes, of course, it causes our children to have records. So my two experiences with this is I was a director in Illinois and in Indiana. So in Illinois, our protocol is if something happens, let's say a student brings narcotics or a weapon, we turn in the narcotics or the weapon to the police, but we turn the child over to the parent. Now, if something's going to happen after that, the police has to handle it with the parent, but we don't turn the child over to the police. So there's no charges to the child. We just deal with the child as a school. But in Indiana, when I became the director over there, they would turn the child over to the police without calling the parent first. And so the child would be arrested and charged and processed and everything. And then they would call me to say, well, now it's your issue, you have to deal with it. And I was like, well, where's the parent? Oh, the parent's at work, the parent's on their way. We couldn't get in touch with the parent, but they've already turned the student over. And it could be something as small as, the student brought a joint to school to show their friends or something like that. So that school to prison pipeline is real and alive with the police that are in the schools. I've also seen videos that children capture of the school police slamming kids to the ground and hurting them and getting into physical altercations with them because the student was fighting another student and the police officer wanted to break them up, or the student got too mouthy with the police officer. So bottom line is, in summary, they were not handling it correctly. They have no training to deal with kids. They're just as scared of our adolescent Black children as they are as our adult Black people. They have no de-escalation techniques. They have no idea of social emotional well-being of children. And so they have no place in our schools. So before I left Indiana, one of my goals was to train them. I tried to get them out. Obviously, I was not successful. I was overruled. But one thing that we were able to do was to train them better and how to de-escalate rather than put hands on children, and also try to get them to stop calling dispatch to put charges on kids. I've had to call myself parole officers in courts to get charges dropped on multiple middle school students for the smallest things, such as fighting, which they'll put assault charges on them. And now that I'm hearing the conversations all over the place, reconsidering that, it makes my heart happy, because I have lost many kids to the police system because of police being in our schools when they have no business being in our schools. And talking about special education, I have an autistic child who's having a meltdown and 4 police officers were holding him down.
So I hear what you're saying, and I don't want to just cut you off, but I kind of just want to jump in. I'm really solutions oriented. Hi everyone, my name is Tyaisha Gibbs. I'm the Director of Expanded Learning Opportunities for NJSAC, which is statewide network for after school communities in New Jersey. Now, my question is, right now the conversation is around defunding the police, right? And I hear what you're saying in terms of school resource officers. I think we need to kind of reimagine what that looks like, and nobody's going to reimagine what that looks like for them, really. So we should probably put together something. I see there's 42 people on the call. So maybe an action step could be, what exactly should a school resource officer be there doing? I know that I saw here in Newark Police Department, they just are getting ready to launch a youth engagement strategy. And one of the suggestions that I sent to them was that, a school resource officer should be doing other things and not being security, because you hire security by the school district to be security. So a school resource officer should be doing more so the resource part and not being an officer while they're in schools. So the other thing that I was going to say is, while we're reimagining what schools are going to look like in the fall, I think perhaps maybe a working group can come out of this, where we can have a working doc and we can type up, what is that going to look like, and what are we demanding? What are we asking for? All you guys are from all over the country. So I think if we grow as a collective and use our collective voices, then we'll be able to make a bigger impact and actually make some change. And I know we all know people who have their hands in policies. We all know politicians. I have sorority sisters that are literally council members, mayors, congresswomen that I know personally, that I can reach out and say, here, a bunch of educators got together, we drafted a policy. You can tweak it and put your name on it and put it forth. So that's just what I was going to say. And my friend is a social worker here in the KIP. I don't know if you want to say all that. Hi.
So I'm a high school social worker, and how I've seen the school resource officer roles change, they really did serve a role as being a resource previously. And like a lot of policies, like a lot of procedures, they have shifted away from that to only responding when violence takes place in a school, from when a incident happens, or even being the connector to maybe a prosecutor's office, because I'm in Newark as well, prosecutor's office for when a student needs to be arrested. One of the issues that we've been running into was we expected the resource officer to assist us with locating students and families who we weren't able to get in contact with during this time, during COVID, and literally heard from them, oh no, we're not going to the home, we're not doing that. What purpose are you serving? I've had more assistance from like the detectives bureau than the actual school resource officer. So I like what Ty just said, in saying like we need to make a proposal to send to them. Yes, so I understand there's attendance officers, you have resource officers, but the resource officers that I knew from when I was doing community work, rather than being in the actual school, used to provide, and I'm looking to the side because you guys are on the TV, used to provide more of actual resources or linkages to community programs that were in partnership with the police department. So one of the things that I know that New York City Department of Probation started doing with students is having the close to home programs and those initiatives to assist students on the back end after they are coming home from being incarcerated. We need to get back to being proactive and create those programs to keep them from getting arrested, keep them from getting incarcerated, and actually provide those supports. That's one of the things that I like in my role as a high school social worker with KIP. We are offering those resources and supports to the Black and brown children that are in our schools, and partially and mainly rather it's counseling. So that's just my bit, just an idea to throw out here. And Courtney Mix,
Rev, I saw you had your thank you. Rev, I saw you had your hand up. You want to jump in?
Yes, thank you. So I am a former educator turned attorney. I'm with Success in Motion. I just put a quick bit in the chat, but I just wanted to echo the sentiment that was just shared as far as identifying the components of how we can change the resource officer's role to really de-escalate. And so I work in the family division in the Superior Court of New Jersey, and a lot of the cases that we would see having to do with juveniles, many of the parents weren't addressed. They don't know what's going on. Either they can't engage because of financial constraints or employment constraints. So I just want to echo that sentiment that we continue to try to reach these teachers, try to reach through the parents, because this is a big issue. It ends up in the court system with our juvenile system as well as the family division, and it interplays so many different ways. We have to consistently try to work with parents so that they are part of the process, because a lot of people, even early on, are stripped of their rights and involvement in their child's matriculation through school, as well as instances of conflict. They're not really part of the process. So as educators, I just challenge you guys to continue to, do what you can to get the parents involved. I'm trying to do my end as an attorney, but I think that it's a constant fight to really get involvement, especially when you find out some of the barriers. It could be academic, it could be language barriers, they could have financial needs that we can't really address. So I just want to continue to encourage you guys in this discussion, but just don't forget about the parents. And also, when your children are interfacing with officers or in a criminal justice type of proceeding, and have them kind of drill them, I need to speak to my mother. Adults say I need to speak to my attorney, but children need to speak to their mother or father, grandma, whoever is their guardian. Just have them recite that repetitively so that the officers, even though perhaps they may not be, there's different reasons that involve with officers, but just insinuating to the children, I need to speak to my mom, I need to speak to my dad, so that they're drilling the officer so that if they don't pick it up, that they know that they've made those demands.
Thank you so much, Rev. I want to remind everyone that we have resources placed inside of the chat. Please look to the chat for any of the resources. Also, if you're looking to join any of the Black educator groups, they will also be in the chat. Please also look to on Classroom Culture, on Instagram, on Facebook, and on Twitter. To join in on the other conversations that we have. We've been having roundtables here all the time. So please come back for more. I want to thank you guys all for participating with us, for joining in this conversation. These are conversations that we continually need to have as parents, as educators, as friends, as family members, as everyone who have to raise brown and black and even white kids in this world, in this society. We do it for all. We do them for them all. And I want to thank you guys for coming. It was a great opportunity to sit and talk to you guys. Thank you so much. Mayor?
I am here. That was wonderful. Heavy at times. We found some little pieces of joy in there with your stories. And I'm really thankful that you were also vulnerable to share things that have been traumatic, but to also share fantastic ideas for next steps. And I hope to bring us all together again in the same room as this movement continues to grow. And we thank you.
Can I have the members please stay after, because we're gonna log off everybody. Thank you guys for coming again. We really appreciate it. Facilitators, please, panel, please stay on so we can definitely have a quick debrief after all of this. Thank you guys.
Thanks everyone.
I'm logging off, Nelly, but I have a question. How can we get the chat?
How can you get
it? Actually downloads and saves, and I'll send a transcript.
He got it already?
Okay. You there, Michael?
No, I'm here.
Oh, okay, there you are. No, it'll create a transcript.
You can actually save the chat too.
Yeah, and then I'll send it over to you.
Nelly,
your way.
I'm late for my online class, so Nelly made me late, but I'm happy I came. This is really good.
Happy you came too.
All right, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
I have a question. Is there a mailing list?
There is. And
or a listserv?
Looking around. When you go to the website, the first page when you go to log on, and I will put it here in the chat, you'll see a space to sign up. And of course, if you're a social media person also, that'll be available, but definitely.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you. Trying to see who else we have here.
Pat, is that you on S8? Nope.
Nope, that was your husband.
No, not my husband, my cousin's husband. His name is Dept.
Oh, okay. Let's see, we have some folks that are still heading out. And it's us.
Yes.
Hey, that was great. Just as we planned, right? It takes off a mind of its own. So Nelly had all these fantastic questions prepared, but folks really shared and jumped in.
Yeah, this was great. Like, I'm not even gonna